In this video, we'll talk about several ways to protect DNS servers and clients from malicious attacks. These include DNSSEC, DNS socket pooling, DNS cache locking, response rate limiting, and DNS based authentication of named entities, or DANE. Now, before we look at how to protect DNS, let's look at some of the types of attacks we're protecting it from. In a normal DNS operation, the client requests a record from its recursive DNS server, and the DNS server finds the record and sends it to the client. However, this communication can be intercepted with what's called an on-path or man-in-the-middle attack. In this case, an attacker can steal data and manipulate network traffic. They can even impersonate devices on the network in what's called spoofing, and send clients to fake websites and other servers where the clients may fall prey to more attacks like malware and phishing. So how do we protect against these DNS impersonators? One tool we can use is Domain Name System Security Extensions, or DNSSEC. With DNSSEC, the recursive DNS server digitally signs the record so the client knows that the record is from the authentic server and that the record wasn't changed in transit. This protects the client from imposters that try to serve it false information using the on-path attacks and DNS spoofing we just looked at. If the DNS record data isn't signed by the authentic DNS server, the client won't use it. Even if an attacker manages to intercept the signed data and changes it, the digital signature will show that the data was changed, and again, the client won't use it. Now, let's look at another attack called DNS cache poisoning. Typically, when a client requests an IP address, the recursive DNS server first checks its zone and cache for the record. If the DNS server finds the record in the cache, it sends it to the client. However, if it doesn't find the record in the zone or cache, it queries root servers and top-level domain servers, or forwarders, and is directed to the authoritative server. Here's where the attack comes in. The attacker impersonates the authoritative server and tries to get the recursive DNS server to accept a fake record by sending it repeatedly. If the server accepts the fake record instead of the real one, the fake record will be stored in the server's DNS cache for the amount of time specified in the server's time to live, or TTL. During that time, the DNS server will serve up the fake record to any clients that request that record. So how do we defend against DNS cache poisoning? Well, one major reason that this cache poisoning attack worked is that traditionally, all DNS query traffic originated from virtual port 53. Knowing this, port 53 makes for an easy target for an attacker. So what if we give the attacker a moving target? This is where DNS socket pooling comes in. The socket pool is a group of 2,500 or more ports that the recursive DNS server can use randomly to query an authoritative server. Having so many random ports makes it much more difficult for an attacker to spoof a DNS server and poison the cache. This is why socket pooling is turned on by default in most server operating systems. Let's look at another defense against DNS cache poisoning, DNS cache locking. When a DNS record is saved in a cache, it's only kept temporarily before being deleted or overwritten. The DNS recursive server has a TTL configured to tell it how long to keep a record. However, a DNS server can allow records to be overwritten before the TTL has expired. This gives attackers an opportunity to poison the cache. DNS cache locking forces the DNS server to use cached records for their full TTL. A shortened TTL combined with cache locking is a good strategy against cache poisoning. Even if the cache becomes poisoned, the false record will be overwritten sooner when using shorter TTLs. Now, let's look at a way to defend against a denial of service attack or DOS attack, called DNS Amplification. In this scenario, the attacker uses a DNS server to flood a client with traffic by impersonating the DNS client. The attacker makes thousands of DNS requests, and the DNS server then sends all the responses to the actual client. The client's computer experiences reduced bandwidth and may even freeze or crash while trying to handle all the data. Response rate limiting helps prevent a DNS amplification attack by stopping or limiting the DNS server from replying to a client that has sent too many queries in a certain amount of time. Previously, we saw how DNSSEC helped prove that a DNS server was authentic. Now, let's look at a method to determine if a website or other server is authentic. When you visit a website or connect to an email server, how do you know you're not connecting to an imposter? The first thing you should always look for is the padlock icon in the browser. This icon shows that the connection is encrypted. However, attackers can also use encryption, so the padlock doesn't guarantee the connection is safe. This is where DNS Based Authentication of Named Entities, or DANE, can help us. When a DANE-configured client queries a DANE-configured DNS server, the server will return not only the A or Quad A record, but also a Transport Layer Security Authentication, or TLSA record. This record tells the client which digital signature to look for from the legitimate server. When the client contacts the server, the client compares the server's digital signature to the one from the TLSA record. If they match, the client will connect to the server. With DANE in place, if the client is somehow directed to the wrong website, the digital signature won't match, and the client won't connect. DANE defends against on-path attacks and cache poisoning, but DANE only works if DNSSEC is also configured on the DNS server. Otherwise, you can't trust the DNS server or its records to be authentic. Therefore, DANE is mainly used to authenticate email servers and fight spam, but can also be used for websites and other servers. That's it for this lesson. In this lesson, we looked at some of the attacks used against DNS servers and clients and several ways to secure DNS using DNSSEC, DNS socket pooling, DNS cache locking, response rate limiting, and DANE.